funny how your health can so dramatically change your life, and my health did change my life forever. And yeah, it's another story.
And let's hear that story. We're here with Ron Byers talking about his life.
Way back in the mid-1980s, we as a community in Edmonton started hearing about this GRID, gay-related immune disease, which would later become known as HIV or AIDS. And we thought, this will never happen in Edmonton. I mean, these stories are coming out of New York, they're coming out of San Francisco, and we thought, that's not going to happen here. Well, in July of 1984, the very first AIDS victim in Alberta was diagnosed, Ross Armstrong, and that was the beginning of the AIDS crisis in Edmonton. And it was the beginning of change. It was the beginning of a change in how people partied, how people associated with other people in the community. I talk about this, as part of a shared experience or a lived experience on living with HIV to nursing students, and I talk about how people reacted to the AIDS virus when it arrived in Edmonton, and I kind of split it up in 4 groups. There were those who were really afraid and just went home and just didn't come back out again. They stayed at home because they didn't want to catch the virus. There were those that were okay with it, but were cautious. So they would come out every once in a while and they would get along with people, but they didn't go home with anybody. I mean, that was just not happening. But at least, they would still go out and socialize. Then there were those that literally bought into the safe sex strategies that were being developed, and condoms were starting to become a thing that everybody was just, you had to have with you. There was a local organization that was formed just to do that, to get out, to do outreach into the bars, to make sure the gay men were having safe sex. That was called the Gay Men's Outreach Crew. And they would go out in hard hats and construction aprons and sometimes cut-off shorts and T-shirts. And they would hand out condoms to all the guys and little pamphlets on safe sex strategies and information pamphlets. And that really changed how people looked at things. But the people that were comfortable with that, the people that read the pamphlets, the people that took the condoms home with them, that was kind of that 3rd group. And then there was that 4th group. And that was the ones that still came out every week, but they just said, fuck it. If I'm going to die, I'm going to die.
So which one were you?
I was that last one. I was in that last one. But so many friends died. So many people I knew died. And it was, I remember going to 1 or 2 memorials at the beginning of there in the mid to late 80s and thinking, I can't do this. And I literally stopped going to funerals for everybody other than my immediate family. Since the mid-80s, I've only attended 1 funeral that was not immediate family, and that was for Con Dragoo, who was an owner of Boots and Sandal. And that was just a couple of years ago. But yeah, I could not deal with it. So funerals were something that I didn't do. And that changed how I interacted with people. But I also, I was skinny. I was only, 110 pounds, I think, at the time. I'm 5'10". And, Michael Fair tells a story that him and his buddies would sit around in Flashback and would point out people in the crowd and say, well, he's got some weight on him, he's probably safe to go home with. Yeah, he's got a belly on him, he's good to go. Oh, he's skinny. I'm not sure I would go home with him. He's probably got AIDS. And people looked at me in those, late 80s and all through the 90s and just assumed that I had AIDS. And so I was getting hit on by guys who had already been diagnosed as having AIDS. And I discovered that I was HIV positive when my health finally got to the point where I just couldn't function anymore. I was working for a company at a retail store in the West End, and I was getting ready for work one day, and I made myself some Eggo waffles, and I sat down at the dining room table in my apartment, and I tried to lift my fork with an bit of Eggo on it up to my mouth, and I realized I just did not have the strength to do that. That was it. That was as far as I could go. And so I called into work sick and called a cab, took me to the University of Alberta Hospital. And I went in there and told them that I wasn't feeling that well. And they got me, my lungs were in pretty bad shape. They put me on oxygen right away, got me into a room within a couple hours. I was wedged between two beds, but I was still in a room with an oxygen and fluids being pumped into me. And the next morning, as they freed up one of the people in the room, the doctor, infectious disease doctor, came in, and she says to me, "So you're HIV positive. We've got a counselor standing outside the door if you want to talk." And I said, "No, I'm fine. I knew this was coming." And that was kind of a turning point in my life, because I sat there in this bed thinking, okay, where does my life go now? And it was really weird. I mean, I expected to die. A couple of weeks of being in the hospital, I was discharged and I was put on oxygen and still couldn't go back to work. But I, met up with my infectious disease doctor who would take over my care, Dr. Barbara Romanowski, who was right there on the front lines in 1984 when it first arrived in Edmonton, because she was the director of the STI clinic. And so she knew what was going on. I mean, she had been part of the programs and part of the early years of the AIDS network, and had helped form policies and procedures on how to deal with people who were infected. And she eventually got tired of the politics and opened up her own private practice solely for people with HIV. Eventually she expanded that and started taking in women and more, generally with infectious disease of a broader nature. But she remained, someone that was so important in my life. And she told me that very first meeting, she said, "So we expect that you could probably have about 2 years." So that would put me to the year 2000. And those medications were tough. I mean, the first set of medications that she put me on, I wasn't faithful with taking them every day. And in those days, the medications that were available, you had to take them on a regular basis. And if you didn't, you became resistant to that medication, and the virus was allowed to build up in your body. And so I became resistant to one of the medications. So she changed my medications and put me onto a different regime. And sure enough, I missed a few of those and became resistant to one of those as well. And then I ended up going on to this third stat. And honestly, the medications that I was taking at that time, I was taking them every couple hours, umpteen times a day. There was like 30 pills a day. And it was just like, why am I doing this? This is insane. I'm subjecting my body to all this crap for what? I'm going to be dead in a year anyway. And so I stopped taking the medications and just thought, okay, this is the time when it's time for me to go.
But here we are 25 years later.
And here we are 25 years later. It was also a time when my good friend, Mr. Vera, decided that she was going to run for Empress and had asked me to run for Emperor. And So we did, and we had been campaigning for several years earlier, which we weren't supposed to do, but nobody else would run against us because they all knew that we were running for that, for Emperor and Empress 25. And so they just backed off. And we just literally were walked into the roles. But it was at a point where I was allowing myself to die. And I really wasn't sure if I was going to be at my own step-down ball. And it wasn't until I was working at Boots one night a week, and this guy comes in from Vancouver. He had left Vancouver because he had a drug problem there, and he thought that getting away from it would help him get away from the drug problem. And he came into Boots, and he had tried to connect on a website, a cruising website, and so I knew he was coming, and told him to meet me at Boots, and said I would be there around this time period. And so he didn't know what I looked like or who I was. And I was serving, serving as bartender, and so I was serving him drinks, and we got to talking. And then Jim McBride, our good friend Jim McBride, came in, and he sat at the other end of the bar. And so I said, well, why don't you come down and talk to my friend Jim while I'm tending to customers? And so he did, and it was after about a half an hour, he finally turns to Jim, and he says, I'm waiting to meet up with this guy named Ron, because I hadn't told him my name. And Jim looks at me and says, oh. And so, finally confessed that I was actually the guy that he was supposed to meet up with. And he ended up talking me into going back on my medication. And so I did in 2001, after I'd stepped down, went back on the medication, and it took me a few years before my viral load was undetectable again. But that was not going to be the last of the challenges that I would face with HIV and AIDS, but it was certainly a change in trajectory for me. I was able to work until 2010, and then my health became to the point where I just couldn't work anymore. And over the following couple of years, I did a few things that took most of my strength to do. One of them was opening up Evolution Wonder Lounge. In 2013, I was thankful and grateful to be able to be a part of that. But it was hard on me on so many days that my body just literally was revolting against the work that I was determined to get done. I'm still forever grateful that I had a chance to do that. But over the following few years, my health would get worse and worse until 2016, and I was barely functioning. I was in diapers. I could barely walk up the steps to my apartment with groceries. It just had depleted me, and the doctors weren't coming up with any solution. And so I started challenging doctors. I got mad. And it was something a dietitian said that got me to do my own research. And I ended up finding that there were medications out there that had been used for treating people with AIDS, but they weren't giving me. And so I started pushing doctors, and I really challenged doctors to think outside of the box for once. And because of that, I finally found a doctor who was willing to work with me and got me on medication that was incredibly expensive, but I had to apply for it to be covered. And I literally sent in a 40-page essay documenting all the reasons why this medication was going to work for me and how it had worked on people in the past. And it was approved within 5 days by the Benefit Exception Committee of Alberta Health at the time, which was a miracle. But that medication literally saved my life. 2 years later, 2018, my health started improving, and I'm now kind of in the third phase of my life and realizing that this is a chance for me to now build a legacy for myself and to give back to the community. And that's when I started doing so many other things that I've been so grateful to be a part of.
Let's talk about some of those things.
Well, some of the ones that I got involved with, I got involved with a program that was run by what is known now as the Queer and Trans Health Collective, QTHC, and developed the Peer and Peer program, which was a program that helped people that were users to do it safely. So it was a safe consumption program, basically. They kind of changed trajectory during the pandemic because they had to, but it was great to be a part of a team, because there was a team of us that put this program together. They were all in recovery, which I respected, and they all contributed so much from their own personal experiences. And I was there because I didn't consider myself to be in recovery. I was still a user, not to any great degree. I was lucky that there are two things that I've always said I was a total failure at, and one was being an alcoholic, and the other was being a drug addict. I've failed miserably at both, and I'm so thankful for that, because I've always been able to walk away from them with no regrets and no effects on me. But sharing that experience was so amazing. And then got into, I was involved with the Edmonton Pride seniors group for a period of time. And then somebody was looking from a program called the Edmonton City as Museum Project, which was an online storytelling, history storytelling project run by the Edmonton Heritage Council. They were looking for somebody to tell the history of the Imperial Sovereign Court of the Wild Rose, because they'd heard about it. And so our good friend, Lawrence Stelmack, who we know as Big Daddy, heard about this and said, well, you should talk to Ron Byers. And so they reached out to me, and we had a conversation. And they said, you can pitch some other story ideas to them. I said, okay, well, I'll pitch the history of Edmonton's gay bars, because I'm pretty certain I've drank in every one of them. And they said, okay, fine. And so they contracted me to write these two stories. But I knew I couldn't do them alone. And so I reached out to my good friend, you, to help me on that. And I said I would write the history of the Imperial Sovereign Court of the Wild Rose, Part 1, from year 1 up to year 25 when I stepped down. And you wrote from year 26, which was your year as emperor, to I think it was year 40 that we were at that time. And so we wrote this two-part story. But then we got involved in writing the history of gay bars in Edmonton, and they'd only given us 1,500 words, and I knew that wasn't going to be much. So they offered a couple thousand more, and we both recognized it still wasn't going to be enough, but we still went ahead with it anyway. And we spent a lot of time during the pandemic, because the Evolution Wonder Lounge was closed by the pandemic, and you had no life, and I had no life. So we literally did all this stuff, during the pandemic, in moments when we could get into the city archives and do some background research, plus building on what I had stored in my own memories. And
we did find a few bars that you hadn't drank at.
We did. I know, that was such an amazing,
it's very
stunning
disappointing
experience. It's like, yeah, why didn't I not? Well, because they were open for such a short period of time. But we literally covered almost all of them, and that's still available online on the Edmonton City's Museum Project. And you can read, I think it's all 31 that we covered, and we since have 2 others that we have missed. One was a lesbian bar on the south side, and the other one was a bar on Stony Plain Road and about 151st Street that I actually learned a little bit more history about last week, which is kind of amazing, still learning about these places.
Now, the pandemic changed a lot of things. You also came out of the pandemic, though, on another Pride organization. You'd certainly been involved with Edmonton Pride before.
So yeah, back at in 1998, the Pride, as we had known it at that point in time, was being run by an organization called GALA, or the Gay and Lesbian Awareness Group. And it had gone past the point where they were able to do it anymore. So the Edmonton Pride Festival Society was created. And at that time, it was created with a seat for every organization in the city, organization and business. And so I became a part of it in year 2, which was the year 2000, which was the year I was Emperor 25. So I was there representing the court. And another person that I knew who was had worked at the Roost as a manager and was working at that time at Boots and representing Boots at the Pride Festival organization Pat Riley, the two of us got together and we literally rebuilt Pride and on how it had been happening for many years and tried to compress it into more of a condensed festival rather than a string of events throughout a week. And that really was the basis of where Pride was. So I was on the board for that year, and then I think the following year, and then you were on the board the following that. And then the organization itself changed because it was set up for every organization, every community, city organization having a seat at the table. They stopped filling the seats because they couldn't find somebody that had the same dedication that so many of us did. And so the seats remained empty and couldn't be filled, and the work was falling on fewer and fewer people trying to produce a bigger and bigger festival. And so the board changed a few times and board members started reaching out to friends to help. And so the Edmonton Pride Festival Society became very secluded because it was made up of people who were actually willing to do the work. And the organizations who didn't want to come to the table anymore were left behind. And that's, that led to where things were ended in 2018 with Pride, when the last Pride parade was held until this year.
But Capital Pride formed during the pandemic. You were involved with that.
So as 2 years after, Evolution was holding a few Pride parties on the street out front, and a fellow from Calgary who had been part of the Calgary Pride Festival organization had moved here for work. He wanted to put together a new Pride Festival organization to build on what had happened, in years previous. And so he reached out to me, and I became part of the Capital Pride Edmonton organization, and actually a signer on the incorporation papers. But then the pandemic happened. And so nothing was done until late 2021 and early into 2022. And we thought the best approach at that time was rebuilding with the community members who had stopped us in the past, try and find common ground. We weren't sure it was going to happen that year during June, during Pride Month, but we thought, well, start out small. At the same time, another fellow who had a light and sound rental company up in Fort McMurray for conventions and shows and stuff like that, also was shut down during the COVID period, had heard about all the money that the City of Edmonton was giving out to build community again, and applied for funding for a Pride Festival. And so the Edmonton Pride Festival Association was born a week before the month of June. And so we had the two organizations kind of competing with each other. At the same time, your connection with Explore Edmonton allowed me the opportunity, and they offered to have me write the guide to Pride. And I was so excited by that, but I thought, well, how am I going to write the guide to Pride when I don't know what Pride events are going on? So I used the Capital Pride Edmonton forum to build a website and an event calendar. And I thought, well, I'll just build an event calendar and have people submit events. Then I'll be able to write about the events that people are submitting. And so that's what happened that first year. The Capital Pride Edmonton organization didn't get past that year. They had too much turmoil going on within the organization itself. People couldn't agree on things. And so they folded the following September, October, I think. And I realized, okay, if I'm going to do this again, write the Guide to Pride again for next year, for 2023, I better create an organization. So I created Pride Edmonton, built a website, and Explore Edmonton, thankfully, gave me the offer to write the Guide to Pride again. And so I thought, okay, this is how we'll do it. We'll send out invites to every organization to submit their Pride event. And that established Pride Edmonton as a Pride promotional vehicle for the multitude of organizations. 40 or 50 organizations, I think, have held Pride events separate from a Pride festival since 2022. And I think we're the only city in Canada that does it that way, where we have a multitude of individual events as well as a Pride festival. And they're handled by two different organizations, and we work well together. And each know what role we play in Pride.
Now, that door that Explore Edmonton opened with that Guide to Pride has certainly led to a lot of work with both of us and Explore Edmonton over the last few years, including queer history and the gay games.
Absolutely. So, yes, the opportunity to share the queer history came about last year, and I relied on my relationship that I already had with Explore Edmonton to help a small collaboration of organizations in the city that included Evolution Wonder Lounge, included Rainbow Story Hub, included the Edmonton Queer History Project, and included the Royal Alberta Museum, who had been submitting Pride events to me through Pride Edmonton in previous years. The fellow that was in charge of the Edmonton Pride float that he did on the North Saskatchewan River, he worked at the Edmonton Art Gallery, and he was hired into this brand new position the Royal Alberta Museum had created, called the Community Engagement Coordinator. When I heard that he was moving from the Art Gallery to the RAM, I got in touch with him immediately, and we sat down and talked about how we could build a relationship, and celebrate, the queer community. And I talked about Queer History Month, and so we developed that first program of Queer History Month, and I leaned on my relationship with Explorer Edmonton to help us promote it. And here we are this year. This is now Queer History Month when this is first airing, and we have 10 organizations and agencies that are now part of our Queer History Collaborative, including the Royal Alberta Museum, the Provincial Archives of Alberta, the Edmonton Public Library, the Edmonton Heritage Council, the Edmonton City as Museum Project, the University of Alberta Library, the MacEwan Centre for Sexual and Gender Diversity, the Edmonton Queer History Project, the Rainbow Story Hub, and I think I'm missing one or two in there. But we have probably the biggest collaborative group in anywhere in Canada, bringing a multitude of events throughout the month of October in celebration of Queer History Month. And that's so amazing. But also, as part of the opportunities that Explore Edmonton sent my way, was last year, they pitched the idea of submitting a bid for the 2030 International Gay Games. And so right after Pride Month, I literally, July 1st, went into a meeting with this new Edmonton Gay Games Committee that was started out of Explore Edmonton. So most of the work I had done with Explore Edmonton had been done through one of the groups within there that does international marketing and stuff like that. So I was now working with the Sports and Culture Division, developing this bid for the Edmonton Gay Games. And we spent 2 months doing this. We filmed a video, which included Mayor Sohi at the time, Mary Billets, and people from the Edmonton sports team, Team Edmonton. Marnie Panis was part of it. And we interviewed all of them as part of this video that we presented in Washington, D.C. in mid-October as part of our bid for the 2030 Gay Games. Unfortunately, we didn't get it. There were 3 cities that moved on to the second and final round. Of those, one of them has dropped out, and it's now down to 2 cities, and one of them is Denver, Colorado in the United States. And I would be very surprised if they actually win the bid later
Considering
this year.
everything going on in the States right now.
Yeah. So it's most likely that the 2030 Gay Games bid will be held in Australia. Adelaide, I think, is the city. But I was talking to some folks at Explore Edmonton the other day, and they are on board with resubmitting our bid for the 2034 Gay Games.
So what does this work with Explore Edmonton, this work with all these groups that you're doing now, mean for you at this stage in your life? You said that this is a third stage. So what does that mean about the legacy that you have created so far?
So now I'm at a point in my life, right? So my health is not bad. I mean, there's still a lot of things that bother me and are obstacles to me doing things. But the opportunity and the relationships I've built now with community groups and organizations like Explore Edmonton are allowing me to do stuff that I never in my million years thought I would do. To be able to build these this legacy for myself in ways that are a benefit to our community and that further our community's goal of being accepted as equals in society. And even if it moves that marker forward, even a tiny bit, for me that's an amazing thing for me to be a part of. So I'm glad that I'm doing all this stuff, and I am just having so much fun doing it, and getting so many amazing opportunities. I mean, I'm in 2 films now. I mean, I was in the in the Flashback 2024 film that was produced by TELUS Originals. I'm also in a film that is premiering during Queer History Month this year as well, called Hey Pansy, which discovers or seeks to answer the question, are drag queens dangerous? So I was able to share some reflections on drag history as part of this documentary, I guess, because it actually talked to real people in the city and tried to answer that question. But I mean, I wouldn't. I mean, at this point in my life, I am just having such a blast, and I can't be more thankful for pushing doctors to find treatments that gives me this time of my life. I will cherish it forever.
And it's a time of life where you're receiving some pretty impressive accolades as well.
Yes, I've been very lucky. Last year, I was inducted into the 2S LGBTQ+ Wall of Honor. The American Wall of Honor is actually in Stonewall Inn in the United States in New York City. The Canadian one is located in the Well in Hamilton, Ontario. And I was inducted in their second year. They just recently had their 3rd induction ceremony at the beginning of August. So I'm very proud of that. And then this June at City Hall, I was in a ceremony that the Lieutenant Governor of Alberta presided over. I was given the King Charles III Coronation Medal for the work I've done in advancing HIV awareness. I was nominated by HIV Edmonton and the Canadian AIDS Society. And that medallion that was such a neat thing now sits on my shelf in my living room, and it's a plaque I look at every day and I'm so proud of.
So what's next for Ron?
Gosh, my life I was told I would be dead in 2000. I am literally way past my best before date. I don't expect any future. For me, I have lived my life like every day is my last day, and I will continue to do that. And if some amazing things come my way, I will be so thankful and grateful for that. But I have no vision of the future. I haven't had one for decades.
What's the one thing you would want to leave people with that you've learned in your life?
Man, you got to be flexible. You have to roll with it. You can't. This is me saying this. You can't be stuck on something, and because it's not always going to be the same. Times change. I'm in my 70s, and my life has changed a lot. When I came out, it was a crime to be a gay man, and here we are, many years later, and it's such a different world. And I've had fun adapting to it, and I have fun changing it. I mean, technology doesn't bother me. I used the first little tidbit of information. I used the first computer in 1978 to do payroll at Flashback. 1978. And then I had my first Motorola brick phone in 1986. It was given to me by a friend. I built my first website in 1995. I built the first Imperial Sovereign Court of the Wild Rose website in 1996. It was one of 12, I think, in North America at that time. I love technology. So seeing how things change, it's always changing. And people need to change with it. And that includes the people who don't want to change, especially those that are on the far right. Change happens, and they need to sit up and pay attention, because we have changed the world as a queer society, and we are going to change it more. And I think folks will be so amazed at how much of a difference it'll be between now and 5 years from now. And I hope everybody is part of that evolution.
Thank you. We're done, kids.